Hi, everyone. I'm Manika, VP of Hospitality Payment Solutions with Planet. Really delighted to be here today with a fantastic panel. I'm going to hand it over to Dan to introduce himself.
Hi, Dan Morton. I'm with Hilton. I look after our guest experience, which encompasses payments, and thanks to the shout out from David earlier, digital key and our in-room entertainment and IoT and things like that.
Michael?
Michael Wong with DayBlink GPO. I'm the founder of an organization that helps represent the independent luxury hotelier. So we actually are engaged to support their sourcing needs. And this is my first HETNA, very exciting.
Welcome.
Two of our main categories that are most popular are distribution and credit cards, so it's actually very appropriate. Looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And Marilyn?
Yeah, hey guys, sorry I couldn't be there with you in person. Appreciate HETNA for making it possible for me to be here virtually. I had some personal issues that kept me from traveling. But Marilyn May, I am the head of payments product management for IHG Hotels and Resorts. On that last panel, I noticed that one of the last speakers pointed out that some major brands are actually hiring head of payments, and I'm one of those people. So there you go.
Brilliant. So great to have you. So as Mike said, we're going to hear from the hoteliers. What say the hoteliers? And we're really going to look at it from a payments perspective. So we really wanted to check on what's working in your organizations, right? All of you are working for very different organizations, global organizations, but different in its own way. So we'll start with you maybe, Michael, right? First HETNA, first question.
Absolutely, love it. So again, my clients are luxury hoteliers, right? So I'll just be honest, no one's waking up in the morning and calling me up saying, I really need help with payment processing. And that's not something that we're getting inbound calls every day for, right? We do have around 30 properties that are under development, and those are great targets to actually add to payment processing vendors that we bring on to. In fact, just full disclosure, Planet is one of our amazing partners. And so, yeah, so we'd bring them into those conversations. But it really, and we'd had conversation before this, it's really about understanding where they are, educating them, because payments is something that is a journey. We heard that earlier today. And we want to make sure we're educating them as to the possibilities of what they can go do. But payments is also very personal to them. It is the lifeblood of the organization, especially the boutiques, right? This small 110 amazing 5-star boutique property that we represent. Those individuals are very sensitive to any changes associated with payments.
So the key here is bringing them on a journey. So that's why it's working.
Well, we're at the beginning of the journey, honestly. I think there's a lot of change in the industry. There's a lot of great partners out there. One of the things that we're fortunate to have is amazing partners, right? And there are a couple of people in the room which we actually get to partner with, including Planet. But bringing them to the table and having those conversations with those hoteliers is the key to success.
Great. And Marilyn, what about from your end? What's working?
From our end, we have found a way to standardize our kind of payment stack in the US, and now we're moving towards Canada. So I think that has started to work for us very well. We're still fragmented in a lot of other places, and we found that where we've been able to standardize, that's created a better experience. Now we're making some changes along those lines, but with some of the partners, but just the very fact of having that standard technology in every hotel in the US has enabled the idea of having a vision beyond just what we can do with payments.
Great. And Dan, can you relate to that standardization, or is it quite different?
Sure, we have a few depending where you are globally, what's going on from a processing standpoint. But I think where we connect and what's going well is in some of what Marilyn and Michael said as well. We have great integrations with great partners. We've managed to be able to deliver. Looking at this overall industry, right? It's a complicated industry with franchises and brands and everything else. Sometimes we should, just realize that the fact that everybody's getting paid at the end of the day is actually a success, right? Sure. That's actually a good thing, and I think more to that, we've seen, with our partners over the last couple of years, for example, we were able to work together with several to, roll out contactless payments on property rapidly, quickly through thousands of properties, right? We, on our end, we were able to find a kind of central, simple way to do secure customer authentication for PSD2 in Europe, right? Through a partner that enabled us to make it easier for properties to onboard and participate in SCA, right? So we're working our way through it. The fact that we're able to have a single digital channel that can book and then ultimately pass tokens forward and process with a variety of partners at each property is, there are a lot of things that are going well, I think.
And just on that then, so where do you find the gaps are today, and what are your needs where those gaps fall?
Yeah, so that said, right, there are a lot of gaps, right? So I could start in lots of places, but today, right, we pretty much just take credit cards. We had some people up here earlier. We're seeing and we know and we hear from our guests that are looking for more flexible ways to pay. Mm-hmm. We also see and we hear that guests are interested in how various forms of payment connect from booking to stay, through their stay, when maybe they're eating at a restaurant, going to a spa, and then all the way through to the end of stay and into their next booking, right? We have a number of integrations, we have a number of great partners, but there's a lot of opportunity in streamlining and reducing friction in the guest experience. There's also a lot of opportunity that we think is being left on the table in meeting that guest experience that can be accretive to our owners and simplify the lives of our team members at the front desk as well.
And do you think that's harder with the number of players in the hospitality ecosystem?
I think whenever you have a multi-sided problem, it makes it a little bit more complicated. It doesn't necessarily make it impossible, but it does make it more work, right?
Right.
So that's all the stuff that we're working through.
And just to add on that for Dan, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing in our properties, and I think globally we're seeing this, especially in the five-star boutique world, is that talent, right? We actually need to be able to attract the right individuals to properties. We have some properties that are artificially constrained and actually not opening up the full inventory because they don't have the labor to go do that. Hard for me to go to that property and say, I got this great opportunity. What we really need to do is change your credit card processing. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I can't do the basic stuff over here. Like, we're focusing on that. If we don't have the team to actually go execute against it, it's one thing to have an amazing partner. Yeah. It's another thing to be able to bring those resources to bear and actually have the property meet you halfway.
And so from your perspective, Michael, because obviously you've got a group of boutique luxury hotels. They all have different requirements. They're scattered around the world. It's probably a very different business model. So where do you find the gaps are, and where are how do you represent the needs of your merchants?
So two sides, right? It's one thing, I go into the marketplace, I find the great partners to actually bring to our hotels. And actually the panel right before this, we actually are talking to some, and I probably will be approaching some after this to actually have some conversations. It's one thing to be able to attract those individuals to the table. The next thing is to find, of our 440 amazing boutiques that we represent, how do we actually meet them where they are? And they're all a little bit different. They're city center, they're also destination, right? They're global, and so we have some of those. We also have things like Rocco Forte, where they have 15 amazing properties, and then we also have the small kind of Turkish, 15-room amazing property. So very diverse client set, and therefore they have very diverse needs, and that's important for at least for us to meet them where they are.
Great. What about you, Marilyn?
Yeah, one of the things, and I was going to tag on to kind of what both of my fellow speakers were saying, one of the things that we found as far as a gap was that we had created for ourselves, really kind of by our choice of vendor, was it became very important and very obvious to us that one of the keys with partners was to find someone who was hospitality centric. Right. There are a lot of payments providers out there in the broader world, and there are a lot of payments providers that can process a purchase if you're at a grocery store or you're at a convenience store or a McDonald's. But when you get into the hospitality space, just because of those things that we've talked about, that lag between the fact that your digital experience isn't necessarily connected to your check-in experience, or maybe it is, but only loosely, and the fact that when you check in, maybe that pre-auth happens and then some number of days later, the checkout happens, and those all have to be bundled up together. There's a number of things that can happen to make that go badly. And if you have a partner that doesn't necessarily understand all those nuances of hospitality, you're not going to get the best experience. And to dive a little bit deeper on that, with what Dan was talking about, with everybody wanting to talk about how to make a single experience through the spa and through the other parts of the hotel, we're getting into that same thing. And if you want to find good partners that can really help you understand that, you've got that hospitality experience is so key.
Right?
Because quite frankly, a transaction in hospitality is not at all the same as a transaction anywhere else.
No, that's right.
Because it's not just a transaction.
Exactly, and I think that's something, Michael, you and I were talking about, right? Hospitality payments are not necessarily your standard purchase refund. There's so many different journeys, and you know, somebody mentioned you pay up front, you pay at checkout, you pay everything in between, right? You pay partially. So I think that's something you mentioned, right? We pay in arrears sometimes as well.
Well, that was Dan's.
Oh, sorry,
reaction. Yes.
No, that's, I mean, absolutely. I think we share with the car rental business maybe being the only two industries that actually generally pay in arrears. And that is a gap, right?
Yep.
There are a lot of interesting and exciting companies out there offering great new ways to pay and opportunities, but it's one of the things that, that we continue those conversations around is understanding, all right, well, how does that work in the context of hospitality, right? If I want to book it 6 months in advance, but I'm not going to pay for it right now, I'm then going to check in and want to make sure that I can pay, and then I'm going to stay, and I might charge other things, and I might add other things, and then I pay at the end, right? Everyone in this room is familiar with that, but it's not necessarily a natural fit for a lot of fintech and payment-related companies. I think they're becoming aware of it, and many of them are, maybe here and at other places, and starting to think about how do we serve those needs. But we are a little bit different, right? And that creates a gap, and that creates also, I believe, an opportunity for us to find the right partners and work together.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think it creates an opportunity for some of that innovation that was being talked about on the panel before us, right? For the right partners, it opens up that space to be truly innovative and bring those solutions. They're probably not innovative in the rest of the payments world, but when you've got franchisees and head office and concerns about merchant of record and where the money flows, it just gets a little more complicated.
I guess where that comes from is if you talk to a vendor or a payment partner that has hospitality experience, it makes a big difference because they bring in experience globally, right? And like you said, Marilyn, if they understand your pain points, they've done some innovation or they've come on a journey with yourselves and other partners, and they've sort of said, right, we understand your pain points. We're thinking from a merchant perspective and a guest perspective. Which is different from some, other payment provider might just be interested in retail or other, gaming or whatever. Very different requirements there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even it goes even a layer deeper, and I'm sure that Dan and Mike dealt with this too. I mean, Dan referenced PSD2, even to the level of having to have our payments providers kind of help the regulators understand how different we were for PSD2.
Right.
Because the original PSD2 regulations didn't really work for hospitality, and our use cases weren't covered. And we're finding that again in other regulations that are coming up across the globe. And we've got, and I think Planet's even participating in some of that, like in India right now. So it is very, it's important that we have providers that can help us through that. But again, it creates a big opportunity for that close partnership, which I think breeds better innovation.
100%. So just moving on in terms of what's not working in the industry and, what are you leaving behind? But more importantly, why isn't it working? So Marilyn, you mentioned you've just sort of embarked on a journey with a new payment provider. So what wasn't working? You kind of touched on the fact that hospitality experience was lacking, but, what made IHG go on that journey?
Yeah, well, and I think realistically, our previous provider, we had done a lot of very customized work with. And because of that, we were having to define all the requirements and keep up with all of the regulations and feed all of that information, as opposed to having a payment partner who could kind of go hand in hand with us and help us understand where the payment landscape was going while we understood where the hotel landscape was going. So we wound up behind in a lot of areas. So realistically, we need that. What we're leaving behind is that intense customization on the payment side. I think in the last panel, someone pointed out that payments is really just another distribution method. And when you start to think about it that way, you look at it a little differently. Rather than thinking of, okay, well, I want to define everything about this payments journey, and you start to bring it into the rest of your ecosystem, and looking for partners that know what they're, know how to help yourself.
And how did you get buy-in from stakeholders to make such a big decision? Because usually, any change in hospitality takes years, right? And somebody mentioned that, right?
It did. It did slowly and painfully, actually, would be the best way to describe it. Realistically, we had to complete the rollout with our previous provider and really get to the point where I hate to say it this way, but there had to be a certain amount of pain. Right, we had to kind of I think it was Mike that said, nobody's knocking on his door asking for a new credit card solution. Mm-hmm. But when you get to the point that you do have people knocking on your door asking for a new credit card solution, then you can start to make the case. So when you have owners saying, okay, this is not great. We're falling behind in technology. We're falling behind, and right. we're not able to take contactless payments. We see other chains that can do Apple Pay and can take wallet payments. Why can't we do these things? Well, we have a limitation at our payment provider.
Sure. And
so then there gets to be enough groundswell and noise from the bottom up to help me make that case.
And that's a lot of change and upfront cost to a lot of properties. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, we have actually, that is one thing. We've actually come up with a different kind of a programmatic model where we're not requiring that upfront investment and changing it to more of a monthly payment type of model, so that the hotels are not having to capitalize a huge upfront
Fantastic.
Cost. Now that I will say that was the biggest change. Which has kind of broken the dam on enrollment.
And Michael, you wanted to comment on something because I saw you pick up your mic.
Yeah, two things. One is, it's one thing to actually have the innovation and it be lagging and your partner is actually not keeping up with the technology. Mm-hmm. Generally, there's amazing players in the space, and so there's going to be some areas of gaps. But what I truly believe is why I get that phone call, because it's the relationships between the properties and that partner breakdown. It's complicated. Things break. That relationship needs to be able to work through those items, and if not, that's when I get the phone call, right? And I think for everyone here, it's about maintaining those relationships with the property. I think you guys know that.
So Michael, what about from your end? What's not working and what are you leaving behind? Obviously, you've just embarked on a new journey of a new payment provider, but what wasn't working? Was it similar? You weren't getting what you needed from your existing payment provider, or was it more change?
Well, to be fair, we entered into the payment space. It was one of the first areas in which we were asked to actually embark upon. It was that and distribution, and beginning with the OTAs and some of the bed banks. Oh, by the way, for everyone's here, tomorrow there'll be a press release about one of our latest partnerships. We're really excited about it. It's with hotel beds, so they're here. I don't know if someone's in the room here from them, but we actually received the enterprise agreement with them. So there's 10 enterprise contracts out there, and we're number 11. So we're excited to have them. Anyway, I digress. But when it comes to kind of what's going on with the payment solutions as we look at them, we entered into this 2 years ago with another provider. COVID happened. Their risk appetite with that partner actually diminished. So they didn't want to take in any more hospitality in their portfolio. So we actually had to find somebody, like we talked about earlier, who understands hospitality, right? And that's why we pivoted to a new provider.
Great. And what about yourself, Dan? What's not working?
Yeah, so I might answer it a little bit of a different way. We talked about the gaps, right? And while I suppose I could go down the path of talking about one of my favorite bugbears of virtual credit cards, I'll save that for another conversation. I think what won't work is sitting still, right? Our guests' expectations are changing, our owners' expectations are changing, our team member expectations are changing every day, and it'll increasingly not work for us to sit there and not start working those problems and solving them, right?
Sure.
Go ahead.
But then what is it that you would leave behind? I mean, obviously that's, the ideal situation where we don't want to sit still. But, there is a journey with your team members, with your stakeholders, with your guests as well. And, David said that he had posted something on social media about Hilton in 2016. I mean, are we there? From a Hilton perspective, are you there with all those?
In payments, we're not there, right? I mean, we're relatively early in that journey. I think our industry is relatively early in that journey at large, right? But the opportunity will require us to leave behind certain legacy systems and probably some partners along the way and so on as we bring on new capabilities and partners. But I think somebody in the last panel, it may have been David, I don't remember, said, everybody should have a payment strategy, right? Yeah. And yeah, everybody should have a payment strategy. And that's kind of where we started. We started at the end. What do we want the experience to be? How are we going to get there, right? And so we start building that out. We build out a strategy, we build out a roadmap, we start building teams. I'm super fortunate that my stakeholders really understand that and they really get it. There's a really, I consider it a really cool and unique property about payments when you're thinking about the overall guest experience that payments is an opportunity to both delight everyone in the journey and frankly, to accrete more revenue all at the same time, right? So it's not a pure cost. Right. It is an opportunity if we get it right. And so building that plan and bringing that to our stakeholders, that it was hard for them not to get excited.
Wouldn't it be amazing to have someone pay without actually feeling the pinch, right? To make it so easy that you don't even think about it. I mean, contactless has done that. How many times do you just tap? It makes it so easy. And then later on, when you get your bills, you're like, oh crap, was it that much? So it'd be great to be in that position when you're sort of booking and staying at hotels, right? Mm-hmm. We're not quite there. So
yeah, and that's one of the things that we are kind of talking about strategy, right? Is getting that integration between the digital world and the on-property world, right? How do you make that flow make sense? Because a lot of times they feel really disconnected. I make my reservation, I make my booking, and that's all fine. And then I go to the property and other things happen. And how do I make those two feel a little bit more connected and as opposed to kind of two different experiences from a payments perspective? Because I mean, right now they really are two different experiences because when you're making your booking, nothing's really happening from a payments perspective. So what if that was different? What if there was a connection between those two and it was making it easier, as you said, kind of like Amazon when you have, what do they call it, Amazon-nesia, or things show up and you don't remember that you bought them?
One-click wonders.
Right.
That's actually really, I mean, to jump on that, right? I mean, it is one of the things that's making things easier is as we continue to move our systems into the cloud, right? Get things off-prem into the cloud. It makes it far easier for us to make everyone's life easier on property, add new capabilities more seamlessly and things like that as well.
So it's almost like centralizing your ecosystem so that you can push down payments as well. Are you finding that's going to be harder for yourself, Michael? Because obviously you're dealing with individual properties, but then you're centralizing almost like the purchasing power.
Yep. So it starts with leadership, I think. So one of my big clients is Leading Hotels of the World. So if you know them, they have amazing, iconic properties around the world. The leader there, Shannon Knapp, who I work with very closely, is really going to try to push the envelope for the properties of figuring out innovation that actually works for their properties. Right. So my mandate is to go find those partners, which are probably the people here this weekend, right? So to be able to have those conversations, bring them to the table, figure out what works, and then frankly be patient too, because it is hard to influence change within hospitality, especially technology, right? Yes. We all know that, right? Yes. There's a lot of optimism in the conversations we had and the other panelists. But I do think it's just being patient in those journeys with those partners to be able to influence change is important.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, something, Marilyn, you were saying, you know, wouldn't it be great to connect the e-com journey or the online journey with the physical journey? We've seen other verticals do it. We've seen retail do it. They were two very disconnected. You know, you'd buy something online. I remember the first time e-com came out, I bought something online. I went back to the store. They're like, oh, you can't exchange it here. You've got to post it back. You can't get your refund. But now, you know, as a consumer, we don't expect anything but seamless check-in, check-out as well, right? So I want to buy something online. I want to return it in store, or I want to buy something in store and then post it off if I don't want it. We should have that same experience with hotels. Why shouldn't we?
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, right now, you know, for good or bad, the only way to do that kind of is at peril of the hotel, right? I mean, there is such a thing as, you know, card on file check-ins and things like that, which make a great guest experience and put the hotels at risk, which is, you know, another thing that we would, if I could pick something that I'd like to leave behind, it would be chargebacks and disputes. So that's the that's the big question, right? Is how do you get that seamless guest experience without putting the hotels at risk and still at that same owner value?
But do you think there is almost like a, you know, you've mentioned chargebacks and risk. I mean, we've also talked about PSD2, which is very European, and so with that and SCA, there are new sort of regulations coming in that are going to protect, you know, those token flows for the next sort of pieces of journey. Obviously, you leave Europe and you come into the US or North America, you don't find that same level of protection, right? Because you don't have that same framework. So do you think regulation plays a bit of a role in there, or is it just sort of a combination of sort of reluctance from the hotels and the regulation?
Well, I think at this point, it's reluctance from it would be reluctance, right? I mean, at this point, if we introduced, you know, so just playing that scenario out, so you have the OTAs who are willing to be merchant of record, who are not doing SCA and introducing that kind of friction into their booking flow, and who are managing all their own chargebacks, versus if one of us on our brand.com decided to do SCA and introduce that friction into the booking flow, we'd have people abandoning their carts right and left and just booking on the OTA.
Right.
Or at least that's what we were afraid of. Now, whether that would... in Europe, because it was regulated, it was a level playing field.
Correct.
Everybody had to do it. So there was no fear of, you know, oh, okay, well, we're going to go book with Expedia because we don't have to do it. They had to do it too. So I think that the real concern here would be just that we would be introducing friction and then start to lose out just due to that. I mean, the security, you can't argue that the regulations for PSD2 and that SCA is a better solution, and certainly eliminates a lot of the fraud, but it's just the friction that it introduces when nobody else is doing it is a little scary.
Sure. Any last?
I see Michael pointing to his watch.
No,
Yeah.
I just want to make respectful of, we're in the way of happy hour. So is there a time check, Mike? I'm looking at you, sir.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of minutes, so we could open.
50? Oh,
Oh,
anytime.
right.
Oh, wow.
Oh, we got a longer panel session. How exciting.
Look at that.
I know.
I know, exactly. Please.
So well, we were going to wrap up because we thought we had half an hour. So any last comments? You know, I've heard a couple of things that we should have a payment strategy. I think that's very important because we've seen that actually a lot of hotels don't, right? And a lot of merchants don't. We've seen that, like, actually we need to think about the connected journey. We need to think about taking that leap forward. But any last comments as to what, you know, what your advice would be if you were changing things or leaving things behind?
I think it's really identification of the right partners, that partner ecosystem. You get the right partners, it'll work, right? And you have to understand that it takes time. It's not going to go perfect, and that's what I'd focus on. Get those right partners.
Excellent. Marilyn?
I would, tagging onto that, partners are definitely a key, and then communication within your own ecosystem, within your corporate arena, and then with your hotels. For us, as you know, as I'm sure Dan has this, just over communicating once you've got a path identified forward to your franchisees is key, and getting that buy-in.
And Dan?
Yeah, I just add to that, I think those are great answers. a laser focus on the experience for everybody in the journey, right?
Right.
It is the guests, it is the owners, it is the people at the front desk. We have to make everyone's life easier here, right? And if we can't sell the picture and sell the vision of where we're going and why that's better, then all the great technology in the world isn't going to actually move the needle.
Right.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you. And Mike, do we want questions from the audience? Do we have any questions from the audience?
Do you have any questions from the audience, or shall we address them in the OTA booking session? Will you guys stick around for the
Sure.
group session?
Yeah, I don't know if
Absolutely.
Marilyn can online, but any questions for Marilyn before she goes? Oh, great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Marilyn.
Marilyn.
Thank you all.
Guys, bye guys.